Why would one small lie about working late end a marriage that looked perfect from the outside? What happens when a husband quietly follows the paper trail instead of the excuses? Can a woman who thought she could control the story survive the day her own receipts become evidence? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Adara Linwood, and if you'd told me a single bar receipt would end my marriage, I would have laughed. People lose receipts all the time, right? But that little strip of paper, creased, smudged, and left in my purse, turned out to be the one thing I couldn't talk my way around. I lied about working late that Friday. Said the office needed me for end-of-month reports. In reality, I was at the Lantern downtown, sitting across from Ty, my coworker who made me feel seen in a way Evan hadn't for months. I told myself it was harmless, just a drink after work, something I deserved after another week of deadlines and silence at home. But the lie grew legs. It walked into our house, sat at our kitchen table, and waited for me in Evan's calm voice when he asked how the report went. I answered too quickly, smiling like nothing was wrong. He nodded, said he was proud of how hard I worked. The way he said proud should have warned me. It was too quiet, too steady. I didn't know then that he'd already seen the receipt, proof of everything I thought I could keep hidden. I'm not sure when I started lying to Evan, only that it felt easier than explaining why I didn't want to come home. The office lights always look softer at night, like they gave me permission to exist a little longer before returning to our silent house. I told him I had end-of-month reports, client emails, budget reviews. He believed me because I sounded tired enough to be convincing. The truth was simpler. I liked how Ty looked at me when everyone else had gone home. That small grin when he said I made late shifts bearable. It wasn't a big thing at first, just coffee, then drinks. But it felt like proof that I was still interesting, still wanted, still something other than Evan's wife and Callum's mother. The first Friday, I didn't come straight home. I even texted Evan a photo of my desk to make it real. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and said not to overwork. That calm tone of his always irritated me, like he was too steady to care. Ty joked that my husband sounded like an accountant who married a sparkler. I laughed harder than I should have. We left the office around 8 and walked to the Lantern, a bar that smelled of wood polish and lemon peel. I told myself I deserved one night to feel alive. I told myself everyone bends the truth sometimes. At the bar, Ty ordered whiskey, and I asked for wine, pretending to like something expensive even though it tasted bitter. The music was low, the kind that hides words inside bass. Ty talked about his promotion hopes, about how management only listens to people who sound confident. He said I had that quality, that I could go further if I wanted. He leaned close when he said it, his hand brushing mine. I didn't pull away. I told myself it was harmless, just human warmth. I laughed too loud again. When I got home after midnight, the house was quiet. Evan had left the porch light on like always. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee. 2 mugs sat on the counter, his washed, mine waiting. The small order of things annoyed me. I texted him from the hallway, said, "Work ran late." He replied instantly. I figured. Hope it went well. No question mark. Just that. I put my phone face down and went to shower. The guilt felt thin, like something I could rinse off with soap. The next morning, he made pancakes for Callum and asked if I wanted any. His tone was normal. I smiled, overcompensating. He mentioned he'd left my favorite mug by the sink, the one with the chipped rim. I said thanks and asked how his project at work was going. He said it was coming together slowly. Then he asked if I'd been at the office all night. I said yes, of course. He nodded and didn't look at me. That was the first quiet warning. I ignored it. By the second Friday, the lie had rhythm. I said we were preparing a presentation. I even typed fake notes into a blank document before meeting Ty. He wore the same leather jacket, the same easy grin. The bartender recognized us this time. "Back again?" she teased. I said something about long weeks, and Ty laughed, squeezing my shoulder. We sat closer that night, our elbows touching. I talked about how Evan didn't get me anymore, how everything at home felt like routine. Ty said that's what happens when people stop trying. I said I was still trying, he just didn't see it. Ty smiled and said, maybe I should be seen somewhere else. I laughed like it was a joke, but my heart thudded faster. When I got home, Evan was awake on the couch, laptop open. I froze for a moment before acting casual, kicking off my shoes. He asked how the report went. I said fine, we made progress. He nodded again, that same small motion that made me want to scream. I told him he could have called. He said he didn't want to interrupt. I said he never interrupts anyway. He said maybe that's the problem. I rolled my eyes, went upstairs, and told myself he was just insecure. Sunday morning, while folding laundry, I found the receipt. It had slipped into the lining of my purse, crumpled and faded but readable. The lantern, 2 glasses, 1 whiskey, 1 wine. I should have torn it up immediately. Instead, I hesitated, wondering if I could keep it as some secret souvenir of being noticed. I tucked it back inside. Later that week, something changed in Evan's tone. He started writing things down, grocery lists, phone numbers, small notes pinned to the fridge. He never used to. One morning, I noticed a new entry on his phone calendar. Downtown 11:20 a.m. I asked if he had a meeting. He said just errands. I joked about him being mysterious, and he smiled faintly, saying everyone should have private errands. I told him marriage wasn't supposed to have secrets. He said neither was honesty. I laughed like I understood. At work, Lydia asked if I'd told Evan about Friday nights. I said he'd never understand. He was too serious. She said some men like being fooled. It keeps them stable. I told her Evan wasn't that type. She said, then be careful, honey. Quiet ones collect things. I didn't ask what she meant. The following Friday, Ty cancelled last minute, said he had to meet clients. I still told Evan I was working late. I didn't want to break the pattern. I sat in a cafe across from the bar, scrolling through my phone, pretending to be busy. Around 10, I went home. Evan was in bed, facing the wall. His breathing was steady, almost too controlled. On the nightstand, I noticed my purse slightly open. I froze. The receipt was gone. I stood there in the dim light, my throat dry. Maybe he'd found it and put it somewhere else. Maybe I'd dropped it. I told myself it didn't matter, that even if he'd seen it, he'd never accuse me directly. He wasn't the type to cause scenes. He'd just go quiet, like always. I convinced myself I could handle quiet. Saturday morning, he made coffee. When I reached for my mug, I noticed his hands were steady. He looked rested. That calmness should have scared me, but it felt like safety. I asked what he was doing that day. He said sorting a few things. I asked what kind of things. He said, the ones that get lost if you don't keep track. I said, like receipts? He smiled faintly. Exactly like receipts. I laughed, maybe too loud, maybe too forced. Callum walked in asking for pancakes again, and the moment passed. That night, I sat on the couch pretending to watch a show while Evan typed on his laptop. The faint click of the keys filled the room. I asked what he was working on. He said, just making sure everything lines up. I joked that he sounded like an accountant. He said, sometimes I wish I were. I asked why. He said, they deal in proof, not promises. I didn't reply. When he went upstairs, I opened my phone. Ty had sent a message. You okay? I typed back, fine, just tired. Then I deleted the whole thread, including the pictures. My hands shook more than they should have. The next morning, Evan left early. The kitchen smelled faintly of paper and toner. 2 mugs again. His spotless, mine half full and cold. I told myself it was just another week starting, that nothing had really changed. But as I locked the door behind me, I saw a small note taped under the light switch. It said only, "Keep your receipts." I laughed when I read it, then folded it into my pocket like it meant nothing. But the paper felt heavier than it should. Monday morning started like nothing had happened, which almost made it worse. Evan kissed the top of my head on his way out, his hand light and brief, like he was touching something fragile. I told myself it meant forgiveness. The house felt too neat after he left. Everything in its place, every counter wiped clean. Even Callum's shoes were lined up perfectly by the door. I used to think that kind of order meant love. Now it just felt like distance measured in inches. At work, Ty was waiting near the copier. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee later. I said maybe, depending on my schedule. He smirked and said I always made time when I wanted to. He wasn't wrong, but the way he said it made my stomach twist. I told him not to text me after hours for a while, that Evan was acting weird lately. He laughed, said, "Husbands always get like that when they're losing control." I pretended to agree, but I didn't like how sure he sounded. Around noon, I got a message from Evan. "Don't forget to eat." No emoji, no heart, just those words. I replied with a picture of my salad and a sarcastic proof of lunch. He didn't respond. I stared at the grey read mark for too long before locking my phone. Later that afternoon, Paula from HR stopped by my desk. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that hides curiosity. She said my husband had called earlier, asking to confirm my overtime schedule for last week. My mouth went dry. I forced a laugh and said he probably misunderstood something. Paula said it was fine. She just wanted to make sure there wasn't an error in my timesheet. I told her everything was correct. She nodded slowly, then added that if there were domestic concerns, the company could provide mediation resources. That word, domestic, rang in my ears long after she left. I went to the restroom, locked the stall, and sat there staring at my hands. My pulse thudded behind my ears. I wanted to be angry at Evan for embarrassing me, for dragging work into this, but part of me was afraid. Afraid of how calm he was about it all. I texted Lydia. He called my office. She replied, "Quiet men make lists, honey. They build cases, not arguments." I typed back that she was being dramatic. She sent a single word. "Watch." That night I cooked dinner, something I hadn't done in weeks. Evan thanked me, which somehow annoyed me more than if he'd complained. He asked if things at work were less busy now. I said not really. He asked if Fridays were still packed. I said yes. He nodded, chewing slowly, like he was thinking through every answer. I told him to stop interrogating me. He said he wasn't. He was just understanding patterns. I told him he was making me sound like an experiment. He said, "Maybe that's what this is." Then he cleared his plate and went to the study. I followed him, hovering at the door. The room looked too tidy again. His laptop screen glowed faintly. A spreadsheet open, lines of numbers and dates I couldn't read from that distance. I asked what he was working on. He said budgets. I said, "We don't even have a budget spreadsheet." He said, "We do now." The printer hummed, spitting out a page that he immediately flipped face down. I told him he was acting strange. He said, "You notice that now?" When I went back to the kitchen, my phone buzzed. A text from Ty. "Missing our Fridays already?" I deleted it before Evan could see. But later, when I walked past the study again, he looked up and asked if I needed help with anything. His tone was polite, nothing more. I said no. He said, "Then maybe you should rest. You look tired." It sounded like advice, but it felt like a warning. The next morning, Callum spilled cereal on the floor. Before I could grab paper towels, Evan was already kneeling, wiping it clean, saying softly, "Accidents tell stories." I asked what that meant. He said, "Nothing, just thinking out loud." At work, gossip had started. Lydia sent me a screenshot from someone in accounting, a comment on a photo of Ty and me, from a company event months ago. Someone had tagged us jokingly as Team Friday. I told her to unlike it before Evan saw. She said too late. That tag had been up all weekend. My heart dropped. I scrolled through my notifications, untagging, deleting comments, pretending it was all just noise. But I couldn't stop thinking about that call to HR. Evan's calm voice explaining my schedule. That evening, I came home to find the kitchen spotless again. On the table sat a folder labeled Household. I flipped it open expecting bills. Instead, inside were color-coded dividers, utilities, insurance, savings, and something labeled Miscellaneous. I opened that one and found a printed photo of the lantern's exterior, time-stamped. My stomach turned. I shoved it back into place just as I heard the door open. Evan walked in, hanging his keys slowly on the hook. I forced a smile and said I was looking for the electric bill. He nodded, washed his hands and said, "Everything's there if you look carefully." Dinner was quiet except for Callum's chatter about school. When he went to bed, I asked Evan if he'd been through my things. He said, "Why would I need to?" I said I didn't know, maybe because of that receipt. He looked at me calmly. "What receipt?" My throat tightened. I said, "You know which one." He said, "If I knew, I wouldn't have to ask." His eyes stayed steady on me until I looked away. I tried to change the subject, asked if he'd talked to his mother lately. He said she called that morning. I asked what she said. He said, "She asked if we were happy." I laughed and said, "Mothers always worry." He said, "She usually worries for a reason." Then he got up and went upstairs. I stayed at the table, staring at the folder like it might open itself. Later, I went to our room and found him already asleep, or pretending to be. His breathing was too even, too practiced. I whispered his name, but he didn't move. I lay there for a long time staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe the story I'd built, the playful lie, the harmless drinks, had already written its ending. Friday crept up again. I told Evan the same story. Late shift, final reports. He said, "Of course, you're very dedicated." I smiled thinly. He kissed my cheek and said, "Don't forget to clock out." At the lantern, I sat alone, sipping wine that tasted like guilt. Ty texted that he couldn't make it again. I scrolled through photos on my phone, deleting any that could be misread. Around 9, I saw a reflection in the bar mirror. Someone who looked too much like Evan. My heart jumped, but when I turned, the man was a stranger. I laughed quietly to myself, paid the bill, and left a bigger tip than usual. When I got home, the house was dark except for the faint glow from the study. I crept closer. Inside, Evan sat at his desk, typing. He didn't look up when I entered. I asked if he'd been waiting for me. He said, "I was just finishing something." I asked what. He said, "Confirmation." I didn't ask what that meant. The next morning, while folding Callum's clothes, I found a small slip of paper in the laundry basket. It wasn't mine. It was from a print shop downtown. The words read, "Copy order ready for pickup. Photos, timestamp, receipt scans." I felt the room tilt slightly. I told myself it could be anything. Something for work, maybe. But deep down, I knew. Evan came in a few minutes later, kissed my forehead, and asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. He said, "Then just rest. It's going to be a busy week." His voice was calm, steady, terrifying. I smiled like everything was normal and watched him leave, the note still crumpled in my hand. The house was silent again, too clean, too perfect. I went to the study, opened the folder labeled Miscellaneous, and stared at the blank divider behind it. My fingers traced the empty space where another section could fit. I wondered what he'd name it when it was filled. By Monday, the quiet had teeth. Every sound in the house felt sharp, the drip of the faucet, the hum of the fridge, even Callum's laughter. I told myself things would cool down if I just acted normal. Pretend long enough, and maybe it becomes true. I ironed Evan's shirts, packed Callum's lunch, sent cheerful emojis in our family group chat. It was performance art by then. At work, people stared longer than usual. Word had gotten around that my husband had called HR. Paula must have told someone. Lydia said the rumor was I was having a hard time at home. She said it like gossip disguised as sympathy. I asked her to stop talking about it, but she said, "Honey, people already are. You might as well control the story." That line stuck to me like glue. Control the story. That was what I'd been doing all along. So when Friday rolled around, I suggested a girls' night post for social media. Lydia thought it was brilliant. We took a photo in the office kitchen, all smiles, wine bottles photoshopped into our hands. I captioned it, "Work wives deserve weekends too." Within an hour, it had likes from people I barely knew. I tagged everyone except Evan. I told myself it wasn't spite, it was privacy. That night, I didn't go out. I just sat on the couch with a face mask on, scrolling through comments about how glowing I looked. At 10, I checked the door. Evan still wasn't home. His text arrived half an hour later. Staying out late. Don't wait up. No punctuation again, just that plain line. I replied with a thumbs up. For the first time, the silence felt heavier than guilt. Saturday morning, Marion called. I almost didn't answer. Her voice was calm but cool, like someone handling glass. She asked if Evan was home. I said he was running errands. She said, "He's been running a lot of those lately." I laughed nervously and asked if she wanted to talk to Callum. She said, "Not now. Just take care of yourself, Adara." Then she hung up. That yourself sounded pointed. When Evan came home, he had a new lockbox under his arm. I asked what it was for. He said, "Storage." I said, "For what?" He said, "Records." He carried it upstairs without looking at me. On Sunday, I convinced him to go to brunch with friends. I wanted witnesses, proof that we were fine. The restaurant was crowded, our usual group buzzing around the big corner table. Lydia was there, of course, wearing sunglasses inside, like she was famous. I introduced a story about marriage balance, joking that some men couldn't handle independent wives. The table laughed. Evan didn't. I said he used to get jealous when I worked late, but now he was training himself to trust. Lydia clinked her glass to mine and said that was progress. Someone asked what the secret was. I said, "Let them worry a little. It keeps them interested." More laughter. Evan sat still, cutting his food into perfect squares. I could feel the weight of his silence even over the noise. I told him not to look so serious, that everyone was joking. He said, "Everyone?" His tone made the table quiet for half a second before someone changed the subject. When we got home, he went straight to the study. I followed, saying he'd embarrassed me. He said I'd done that myself. I snapped that he was impossible, that no one could live under his microscope. He said calmly, "Then stop giving me things to look at." That line hit me harder than shouting would have. Monday, at work, Lydia showed me a video someone had posted from brunch. You could see me laughing, gesturing, Evan sitting beside me, unmoving. The caption read, "When you know she's the problem, but you can't say it in public." It already had dozens of likes. My stomach dropped. Lydia tried to delete it, but the damage was done. By Tuesday, even Paula from HR asked if everything was okay at home. I wanted to scream at her, tell her to mind her own business. Instead, I smiled and said everything was wonderful. That evening, I made sure to cook again, to wear lipstick before Evan got home. I poured wine, asked him to sit with me. He did, silent as always. I asked if he'd seen the video. He said yes. I asked if he was angry. He said, "No, you seem to like attention. I just wanted to give you more." I didn't understand what he meant until later. That night, I posted a photo of our dinner, captioned, "Back to normal." By morning, there were comments asking if we were working things out. I deleted half of them. Evan didn't mention the post, but I noticed he'd removed our relationship status from his account. Wednesday, I came home early and found the lockbox open on his desk. Inside were documents, printed screenshots, time-stamped texts, bank statements. I flipped through quickly, my hands shaking. One page had my photo from the lantern, printed in grainy color. Another listed dates and transaction times that matched every overtime shift I'd claimed. My head spun. I barely had time to shove everything back before I heard the garage door. He walked in, holding a small bag of groceries, smiling faintly. "You're home early," he said. I stammered something about leaving work sick. He nodded, set the bag down and asked, "Feeling better now?" I said yes, though my voice cracked. He handed me a receipt from the store, milk, eggs, coffee, and said, "Proof of purchase. Keeps things simple." Then he went upstairs. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried quietly, not because I was guilty, but because I'd lost control. He wasn't shouting, wasn't asking for explanations. He was documenting. I could feel it, like every word I said was already being filed away somewhere. Friday came again, and Lydia insisted on another night out. She said we needed to show everyone we were fine. I didn't want to, but she wouldn't stop pushing. We met at the rooftop bar where our group usually gathered after big office projects. I wore a dress Evan had bought me years ago, the one he said made me look like summer in motion. I posted a quick selfie with the skyline behind me, tagged Lydia, left the caption blank. Halfway through the evening, I noticed someone filming. 2 tables over, a woman from accounting was pointing her phone toward us. Lydia said she was probably jealous. I brushed it off. Near midnight, Evan texted, "Drive safe, that was all." Saturday morning, when I opened my phone, the rooftop photo had dozens of comments, most harmless, a few mocking. Then I saw one from an account I didn't recognize. "Working late again." My chest tightened. Evan never commented on my posts before, but the tone, dry, simple, felt exactly like him. I deleted it immediately, but Lydia had already screenshotted it. She sent it to me with a message. "He's making a move." I laughed it off, said he was being petty. She said, "No, he's being methodical. There's a difference." When Evan came downstairs that morning, he poured his coffee, added just 1 spoon of sugar like always, and said, "I saw your picture." I said it was just a night out. He said, "Everything's just something with you." I asked what that was supposed to mean. He said, "You'll see." Sunday, Marion dropped by, unannounced, with a bag of muffins. Her face looked tired. She asked if Callum could stay with her next weekend for a little change of scene. I asked why. She said Evan had mentioned sorting things out and thought space would help. I smiled and agreed, pretending it didn't matter. After she left, I went upstairs and found Evan packing Callum's overnight bag. I asked if we were taking a trip. He said, "No, just organizing." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that comment, "working late again," until the words burned behind my eyes. I checked our bank account, saw a charge for DocuPrint legal services. My heart raced. I told myself it was probably work-related. But deep down, I knew he wasn't bluffing anymore. At dawn, Evan's alarm buzzed. He turned it off immediately, sat up and looked at me. "You should get some rest," he said. I asked where he was going. He said, "Downtown, follow up." He left the room without another word. The sound of the door closing was so soft it almost felt kind, and somehow that made it worse. The following week started with a silence that felt planned. Evan spoke to me the way coworkers speak when trapped in the same elevator, civil, brief, polite. Callum noticed. He asked if we were mad at each other, and I said grown-ups just get tired sometimes. He nodded like he believed it, but the look in his eyes made my stomach twist. Evan's schedule changed too. He left earlier, came home later. When I asked about his projects, he said, "Mostly paperwork." I joked about him turning into a bureaucrat. He said, "At least they finish things." That line hung in the air long after he left the room. At work, people still whispered. Someone printed out that brunch video, and taped it to the break room wall as a joke before Paula tore it down. Ty asked if I wanted to meet up again, said he missed our Fridays. I told him not to text me anymore. He said he thought I was fun, not paranoid. I blocked his number, then unblocked it an hour later. I didn't know what I wanted. Attention, maybe, or proof I still had control over something. That night, Evan was in the guest room again. I stood outside the door, listening. The soft clicking of keys drifted through the crack. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I knocked once. The sound stopped. He said, "What is it?" I asked if he was coming to bed. He said, "Not tonight." I told him he was being dramatic. He said, "You use that word when you can't name what's real." I walked away before he could see my hand shaking. The next morning, there was a note on the fridge that said, "Pick up Callum at 3. His handwriting was neat, controlled, like everything else he did. At school pickup, the teacher said Evan had already called to confirm who was collecting our son. I smiled like it was normal. In the parking lot, another parent asked if Evan and I were okay. I said yes, of course. She smiled tightly and said, "Good." People were starting to wonder. At home, I opened his laptop when he went to shower. It was password locked now. It never used to be. I almost threw it against the wall, but instead I stared at my reflection in the black screen. I looked like someone I wouldn't trust. Marion called again that evening. She said Evan had told her we were taking some time to reflect. I said that was news to me. She sighed and said, "Maybe it's time you stopped performing and started telling the truth." I told her she was overstepping. She said, "You embarrassed him in front of half this town, and he still hasn't said a cruel word. Think about what kind of man that is." I hung up before I could hear the rest. Dinner was silent. Callum played with his food, asked if Dad was going to sleep in the guest room again. Evan said yes, just until he finished some projects. Callum looked at me, confused. I smiled and said grown-ups have deadlines too. When Callum left the table, I whispered that Evan was scaring him. Evan said, "No, you're scaring yourself." Later that night, I found a small flash drive taped under a folder in the study labeled taxes. It was neat, deliberate. My heart pounded as I pulled it off, half expecting an alarm to go off. I plugged it into my laptop. Dozens of folders appeared. Photos, receipts, message screenshots, calendar exports. One file was titled Sequence. I opened it. Inside was a list of dates and times, each entry paired with a photo or a bank transaction. The pattern was unmistakable. Every lie, every overtime, lined up perfectly. I slammed the laptop shut and stuffed the drive back where I found it. When Evan came in a few minutes later, he looked at me carefully, as if he already knew. He asked if I'd been in his office. I said no, why would I? He said, "Because you have that look again, the one that comes after you find proof." I said he was paranoid. He said, "So I'm the paranoid one now." His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The following day, I went to work early, hoping distraction would help. Paula called me into her office. She said someone had asked for copies of my employment records, attendance, schedules, security logs. I asked who. She said she couldn't disclose that, but it was a lawful inquiry. I sat there, frozen. Paula looked almost sorry for me. "You might want to take a few days off," she said. I laughed, called it ridiculous, but she just gave me a form to sign. When I got home, Evan was in the driveway wiping dust from his car. It was the first time I'd seen him touch it in weeks. I asked if he was going somewhere. He said, "Just keeping things ready." I said, "Ready for what?" He said, "For the moment when it's all official." Then he opened the trunk and closed it softly, like punctuation. That evening, I tried to fight back. I made his favorite dinner, put on music, poured 2 glasses of wine. He sat down, ate politely, said thank you. I started talking, fast, desperate. I said I knew he'd been collecting things, that it was cruel. He didn't deny it. He just asked, "Why do you think you deserve kindness?" That question hit harder than shouting. I said, everyone makes mistakes. He said, mistakes happen once. You built a routine. I told him he couldn't just erase me. He said, I don't need to. You're doing that yourself. Callum came down the stairs halfway through, asking why our voices were weird. I smiled too wide and said everything was fine. Evan nodded and kissed our son's head. Watching that, something in me cracked. The quiet wasn't about control anymore. It was victory. That night, I dreamed of the bar receipt again. In the dream, it kept printing over and over, falling from the printer in endless strips. Each one had a new date, a new lie. When I woke, the sound was still in my ears, a faint hum from the real printer in the study. I went to check. A single blank page sat in the tray. The air smelled like toner. The next morning, I found a sticky note on the counter. Paper drop 8:15. I asked if it meant anything. Evan said, just a reminder. I followed him to the garage, demanding to know what he was planning. He said, you'll find out soon. Over the next few days, little things vanished. Family photos, his clothes from the closet, Callum's framed drawings from the hallway. When I asked, he said he was streamlining. I accused him of preparing to leave. He said, preparing isn't the same as leaving. At work, Lydia said she'd seen Evan downtown near a notary office. She thought it was about a refinance or something. I laughed too loudly and said, probably just paperwork. She looked at me like she didn't believe it. That evening, I checked our shared bank account. His name was still on it, but there were new withdrawals labeled certified copy and processing fee. My throat went dry. I called Lydia and told her everything. She said I needed to get ahead of it. Post something nice, something that makes you look stable, she advised. Control the story before he controls it for you. So I did. I posted a smiling selfie of the three of us from last month, captioned, family first, always. Comments poured in, all hearts and fake encouragement. For a moment it worked. I felt powerful again. When Evan got home, he looked at the photo on my phone screen. Family first, he read aloud. Then he said, good line. You should save it. I asked why. He said, because soon it'll sound nostalgic. He tucked Callum into bed that night with the same gentle patience he'd always had. I watched from the hallway, feeling like a stranger in my own life. When he came out, I asked if he was happy now. He said, not yet, but almost. The next morning, Callum's bag was packed by the door. Marion arrived to pick him up. She avoided my eyes. Evan hugged our son, whispered something I couldn't hear, then handed over the bag. When the car pulled away, the house fell silent again. Evan turned to me and said, now we can handle this properly. I asked what that meant. He said, you'll know when the papers land. Then he walked upstairs, and the soft click of the guest room door sounded like the end of something I hadn't realized was already over. For 3 days after Callum left with Marion, the house felt like a museum. Every sound bounced back at me, footsteps, the clink of cutlery, the small creak when I opened the study door. Evan moved through rooms quietly, collecting, cleaning, labeling. He didn't slam doors or raise his voice. He just existed like a system, efficient and steady. The calmness was unbearable. On Monday morning, I made breakfast as if nothing had changed. He came into the kitchen already dressed for work, tie straight, collar perfect. I said I'd drive him to the station. He said he was taking the car today. I asked if he needed it for something special. He said, proper errands. Then he reached for his travel mug, rinsed it, dried it, placed it back in its exact spot, and walked out. The door closing sounded final, even though he'd only gone to work. I tried to distract myself with cleaning, then with scrolling through social media, then with calling Lydia. She didn't pick up. When she finally replied, her text was short. People are talking again. Maybe lay low. I asked what that meant. She sent a link to a post on a local gossip forum. Someone had uploaded that brunch video again, this time titled, The Office Wife. The comments were merciless. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that people didn't know the full story, but then I realized I didn't know it either. That night, I waited for Evan to confront me, to at least acknowledge the mess. He didn't. He came home, hung up his jacket, checked the lock on the front door, and asked if I'd eaten. When I said no, he nodded, poured himself a glass of water, and said, "You should keep your strength up." I asked why. He said, "There's still a lot to get through." I told him he was scaring me. He said, "I'm not trying to." I said, "Then stop acting like a stranger." He looked at me for a long time, then said, "I stopped being a stranger when I started keeping records." I slept badly, waking to noises that might not have been real. Printer hums, drawers opening, quiet footsteps. By morning, there was a fresh, sticky note on the fridge. "Bring forms." I tore it down and threw it in the trash. At work, Paula called me into HR again. Her tone was too careful. She said there had been a formal request for copies of my timesheets and entry logs, this time through a verified legal email. I asked if she had to comply. She said yes. "He's following procedure," she added softly. I left the office early and walked for an hour without a destination, feeling like the city had shrunk around me. When I came home, Evan was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. A spreadsheet filled the screen, rows of dates and colored marks. He didn't minimize it when I walked in. I said, "So you're tracking me now?" He said, "I'm organizing the truth." I told him he was being cruel. He said, "No. Careful." I sat across from him, shaking. I said I was sorry if he felt hurt. He looked up and said, "You still think this is about feelings?" I said, "It is. We're married." He said, "Not for much longer." My stomach twisted. I asked if that was a threat. He said, "It's a plan." That night I called Lydia again. She finally answered, whispering like someone afraid to be overheard. She said Evan had contacted a lawyer. I said she was guessing. She said, "No, my cousin works at the notary office. She saw his name on a client intake list." I told her she must have read it wrong. She didn't argue. "Adara," she said quietly, "he's doing it properly. That's what you get for pushing a quiet man too far." I hung up. The next day, I tried to talk to Evan while he was shaving. I said we could fix things, that couples survive worse. He said, "Maybe good ones do." I said, "So that's it? You're giving up?" He said, "I'm finishing." I asked if there was someone else. He said, "Yes, reality." He rinsed the sink, wiped it dry, and left the towel folded perfectly. When I checked our bank app later, I noticed a new account labeled Archive B. I tried to open it, but it required a separate login. Beneath the transaction list, a note appeared. Restricted, joint review scheduled. I stared at it until my eyes burned. By Thursday, my coworker stopped making eye contact. Ty avoided me completely. I overheard someone say Evan had been seen at a courthouse downtown. The word courthouse felt like a punch. I went home early, pacing the kitchen until I heard his car pull in. I waited in the hallway, heart pounding. When he entered, I blurted, "What are you doing?" He said, "Documenting." I shouted that he couldn't just erase me from our life. He said, "You did that when you started living too." I followed him upstairs, demanding to know if he planned to divorce me. He didn't turn around. "If that's the word you want, use it," he said. "I prefer resolution." I asked what he told Callum. He said, "The truth, that adults sometimes need order." I grabbed his arm. "Evan, please, I made mistakes, but we can start again." He looked at me like someone studying a broken object. "You call them mistakes because you want to keep them small," he said. "But they're a pattern. And patterns have consequences." Then he walked into the guest room and closed the door. That night, I drank too much wine alone on the couch, scrolling through old photos. In everyone, he looked steady, calm, boring even. I wanted to hate that calm, but now I missed it. I typed him a long message. Can we talk like before? Please don't do anything permanent. I watched the screen. No reply. After an hour, I deleted it. Friday morning, I woke to find my phone face down on the nightstand, battery drained. When I plugged it in, I saw a new contact added overnight, a single emoji of a scale. No number attached. My hands went cold. Evan was already dressed, sipping coffee. I asked about it. He said, "It's a reminder. Balance is due." We ate breakfast in silence. I tried one last time. "We could handle this privately," I said. "No need to drag it into something formal." He said, "Private things lose their value when they're built on lies." I said I was trying. He said, "Then stop talking." Before leaving for work, he stood by the door and said, "I'll handle this properly." His tone was calm, almost kind. I wanted to ask what this meant, but I already knew. After he left, I searched the study again, desperate to find something I could use, a note, a hint, proof that he might still love me. All I found was another folder labeled Final. Inside, blank paper, only the weight of intention. By evening, I was pacing. Lydia called to say she'd heard Evan requested a formal delivery. "Maybe it's a warning," she said. "Maybe not." I told her I wasn't scared, but when I hung up, my hands were trembling too hard to hold the glass of water I'd poured. Evan came home late. He walked in with a faint smile, no anger left in him. I said I was sorry for everything, for the lies, for the bar, for how small I made him feel. He said, "You didn't make me small. You just made yourself smaller." Then he reached for his briefcase. "Tomorrow," he said, "everything will make sense." I asked if it was too late. He looked at me for a long time and said, "For once, you're right." Then he turned off the kitchen light, left the briefcase by the door, and went upstairs without another word. The faint whir of the shredder started a few minutes later. I sat in the dark, listening to it hum, each page disappearing in steady rhythm until there was only silence again. Saturday morning, I followed Evan downtown, pretending it was coincidence. He walked into the courthouse lobby, calm as ever. I waited by the glass doors, my heart beating so hard it hurt. A clerk called my name, holding an envelope. Inside were stamped pages, divorce petition, financial disclosures, copies of receipts and screenshots I'd tried to forget. Evan stood a few feet away, speaking softly to a woman in a grey suit. When he turned, our eyes met for a moment. He didn't look angry, only finished. I opened my mouth to speak, but he was already walking toward the exit, sunlight cutting around him like proof.